Welcome to the P.A.S. Report podcast. If you're tired of censorship, outraged by government abuses, and thirsty for real insights, then you're in the right place. Get ready, because here, the fight for freedom never ends. Here's your host, Professor Nick Giordano.
Welcome back, everyone. Today is a somber anniversary. It marks 7 months since Hamas brutally massacred more than 1,000 innocent Israelis on that extraordinarily tragic day. Israel didn't get much time to grieve because the war against Hamas began. And of course, here in the United States, that war has extended onto our campuses with one of the largest propaganda efforts I've seen in my lifetime. Some in the media call them anti-war protests. They're not. They're anti-Israel, anti-Jewish protests. They're protests in favor of hatred and terrorism. But the tide is turning. Americans have tired of it quickly. Our next guest has been a big part of helping explain why what's going on campuses is not a legitimate form of protest. Joining us right now, Nick Giordano. He's the host of the P.A.S. Report, one of my favorite podcasts, as well as a higher education fellow with Campus Reform. We always love having Nicholas on. Nicholas, welcome back to the show.
Thank you for having me.
A lot of big moments, but you and I have talked a lot in the past that this anti-Semitism kind of flows from the DEI curriculum. MIT just threw out DEI in its hiring. Big win, I think, for common sense, right?
It is a big win, and we've been reporting at Campus Reform. There are some colleges and universities that are moving away from this whole diversity oath that they wanted professors to take, and MIT is the first real Ivy League to actually do away with it as well. And a lot of it has to do with what we're witnessing on the college campuses, where diversity, equity, inclusion is a toxic ideology that spews anti-Americanism, the anti-Semitism that we're witnessing, and it's only gotten worse. So finally, people are waking up to realize the beast that's been created through this diversity, equity, inclusion push, not just over the last few years, but really over the last 2 decades. I mean, if you listen to these student protesters, it really is amazing how little they know about the actual issues. So they scream intifada, yet most of them don't even know it, but they're willing to burn it all down. You hear chants of death to America. Well, would they rather Hamas governs the United States? Would they rather a Hamas-like government here in the United States? And how would they would feel about that when you look at the irony of Queers for Palestine and understand that these students are clueless to the realities of the actual world, and that the education system has failed these students because they're being used as pawns, right? These are not organic protests that just came out of nowhere. We were warning about this back in November of 2023. We saw the writing on the wall at Campus Reform. We knew the anti-Semitism was going to get worse and worse, and it's metastasized because there's no leadership within academia or in the White House.
Yeah.
Professor, I want to ask you about some of the speech that they're using, because in the last week or so in particular, I've heard them saying things like free speech for Palestine. And we know that they know that that is a buzz phrase that is important to Americans as far as free speech. But I got to say, it almost feels like KGB style manipulation of narrative and reality. Do you think that people are buying the fact that they say this is about free speech?
No, not anymore. I think that they could have tried to pull that off a few months ago, and they were successful at pulling it off a few months ago. But at this point, people can see what they see, right? We see it on our television screens. We see they're impeding people's right to move around campuses. We see the harassment, the threats, the name calling, the assaults. And then we see them storming buildings and taking over college campuses. And so people have eyes. They can see this is not about free speech. There are some that want to compare it to the civil rights movement, but this is much different than that. The civil rights movement was based on nonviolence. This is very violent. And that's where you see the calls for intifada, which is a violent revolution. So I think that people see through the nonsense. The right to protest, freedom of speech, I will protect that and defend it all day long. However, the second you start threatening, harassing, and assaulting others, the protest has ended, and it is an extremist organization, an extremist movement that's going on.
Yeah. Nicholas, we've now learning that a lot of the people that are fomenting, participating, carrying on aren't students of these universities at all. The NYPD said the recent arrest numbers, more than 50% weren't students, weren't campus members. There's a report today in ADN, America, a great Hispanic news organization, that a lot of the organizers who've now been self-identified got training for long periods of time in communist Cuba. I think the American public is waking up that a lot of this is manipulated and a little bit of an illusion.
It is. And I think even on Columbia University, one of the people that were arrested was a 40-year-old trust fund baby that doesn't even have a job. And so these are professional agitators that exist within our society. But I think that speaks to how deep this goes and why every American should be paying attention to what's going on, because the students are being used and manipulated in a way to push a communist Marxist agenda within our society. We see the calls not only to free, quote unquote, Palestine, but we also see down with capitalism. We're seeing the communist slogans that we're hearing words like comrades, the collective, and those all harken back to the Black Lives Matter movement that we saw in 2020 that was taken over. And the same thing's happening, only I think the summer of 2024 is actually going to get worse. I think that it's going to be worse than it was in 2020. But the problem is that the education system has failed so much that students aren't really educated, so they're susceptible to this message. My biggest fear is that the anti-Americanism has been so deeply embedded in the curriculums where these students actually feel this way towards America. You have a good portion. Some will say, oh, it's a fringe minority. No, it's not a fringe minority. There is a number of younger people and even older people that despise this country and everything it stands for. And how could our country survive if it's going to be entrusted to a generation that was taught to hate it so much?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Absolutely. And I want to ask you, because there was a Harvard poll that came out, I think, 2 weeks ago, that showed that for people outside of this fringe minority who's out there wreaking havoc on college campuses, causing the cancellation of commencement ceremonies and such, they polled 18 to 29-year-olds, and as far as the Palestinian conflict, on a list of 16 items, it was number 15. So these people, they say empty barrels make the most noise, and I certainly think they are making the most noise, but it seems like even among that demographic, they're not really buying into the narrative.
No, they're not. Let's face it. I mean, most Americans, particularly those under the age of 30, don't really pay attention to much in politics, particularly what's going on overseas. And they're more focused on their everyday lives. So that poll was not surprising. It was a little skewed in the way they asked the questions and the categories they picked out of top concerns. But as far as the war in Gaza right now, most Americans don't believe that it's of the top critical issues within the United States. They still care about inflation and their personal economies, the cost of school, whether they can have a job when they graduate. So those are the things that are always going to be more important than a student body.
Nicholas, as always, great to get you on. We learn more from you than we ever get from the mainstream media. Great to have you on. Folks, we're going to take a quick commercial break. When we come back, a conversation about the IRS you're going to want to hear.
I want to turn now to what has been dubbed anti-Semitism. It's really not. It's just Jew-hating, all right? Let's just use the term for what it is. Being taught not just on our college campuses, we know about that, but our K through 12 schools. Well, the United States Congress held a hearing on anti-Semitism in K through 12 schools. This is the questioning of a New York City school chancellor, talking about why he let a principal remain in place after allowing students to riot. And they were rioting because one of the teachers went to a pro-Israel rally. Watch.
Is the former principal at Hillcrest still drawing a salary from New York City Public Schools today?
Yes, he is.
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
I said, yes, he is.
You are still paying
he is no longer the
former
principal of the school.
How can Jewish students feel safe at New York City Public Schools when you can't even manage to terminate the principal of Open Season on Jews High School, or even endorse suspension of student harassment? How can Jewish students go to school knowing that he is still on your payroll, sir?
I know his payroll it is, sir. And it's not Open Season on Jews School. It's called Hillcrest High School.
We all know what's happening, and we're seeing it mostly in these blue cities, blue states. but I'm afraid it's happening all over the place. Somebody that's been sounding the alarm on this for a long time, of course, is the organization Campus Reform, but especially Professor Nick Giordano, who's a great friend of this program as well, has been talking about this for a long time. Professor, great to see you. Thanks for coming on today.
Thank you for having me, Grant.
So I saw a piece you wrote that basically said, look, we're not teaching U.S. history anymore. Only 13% of our kids are proficient K through 12 in U.S. history, but we're not teaching international history like the Holocaust, are we?
We're not teaching much of anything. You know, people wonder why the college indoctrination has gotten so bad, and it's because we send uneducated people to college. I mean, if these students got serious educations, then the colleges wouldn't be able to indoctrinate them. When we look at it, only 43% of students are aware of the time frame that World War II happened. Only 38% of students are aware that how many Jews was slaughtered, killed in World War II through genocide, through the Holocaust. And then you have 33% that know that Hitler rose to power through democratic means. Now, this should be in the 80 to 90 percentile. Every student should know this, yet they don't. But it gets even worse than that with the diversity, equity, inclusion frameworks that have been built out through the entire country. If you look at the state of California, they have to give ethnic studies course in the K through 12 curriculums. And they refer to Israel as settler colonialism. Well, what are we hearing now on college campuses? We hear that word being used quite often. We also find the stereotypes that Jews and Irish and Polish that came here in the early 1800s, well, they came in with built-in white privilege. See, diversity, equity, inclusion is not lifting up all peoples and treating all peoples with dignity and respect. Diversity, equity, inclusion is picking the winners and losers based on who they want it to be.
You know, you mentioned this idea of teaching settler colonialism. This, I believe I read in your article, is Santa Ana Unified in California. This is about overtaking a minority, right? That's what colonialism, in our case in America, was the Indians. In Israel, I guess it's everybody else in Israel. This all comes down to who the left perceives as the persecuted class, isn't it? And I think the anti-Semitism is the same thing as anti-American. It's the same thing today.
It is. They go hand in hand together. And I've warned at Campus Reform that this diversity, equity, inclusion model is turning us into a tribalized society. And I think that we're witnessing the results, the effects of the tribalism that's going on, where you now have a whole group of people that think that they could freely just hurl anti-Semitic slogans out, chanting death to Israel, 10,000 October 7s, and death to America, and burn the American flag during these protests. And that's what really is disgraceful, what we're witnessing. The diversity, equity, inclusion framework, and just to break it down for New York State, every K through 12 curriculum has to build in how systemic racism has and will continue to impact all of our lives in regards to healthcare, education, government, and policy. And that's the problem. It presents the United States and countries like Israel as if they're countries of injustices, but that's not true. I mean, if you look at Israel, Israel is actually a multicultural society. They have a large Arab population, they have a large Muslim population, and the society is in sync. How many Jews and Christians actually live in Gaza? Well, not too many. So you really see the stupidity and the irony of this whole thing as they're bashing the United States and Israel. They're trying to promote and praise Hamas, which is one of the most intolerant governments that could possibly exist.
Yeah. Everything comes down to hypocrisy when it comes to those on the left. They say stop the genocide in Gaza at the same time calling for genocide in Israel. I mean, this is literally where we're at.
But the danger is... The danger is that we're breeding an entire generation to despise the country that they come from. And so what happens when they take the leadership roles? One day they're going to be in the classrooms and be the teachers. They're going to be the policymakers. They're going to be the lawyers and doctors.
I got some good news.
And how can they run a country when they hate it so much?
I got some good news for you. I get emails all the time from parents. Their kids watch programs like this and others on Real America's Voice. There's a whole slew, as you know, Professor, there's a whole slew of youngsters.
Well, I'm working on a Campus Reform piece about that now.
Oh, that's great. Well, we'll get you back on to talk about that because those are stories we also need to hear. There's a great group of young people that I think this country will be in great hands when we go forward, but we got to keep the pressure on this radical left and the indoctrination of good kids turning them bad. Professor, always great to see you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to the P.A.S. Report. Don't forget to rate, share, and hit that subscribe button. That way you'll never miss an episode. For more exclusive content and updates, visit us at PASreport.com and follow Professor Giordano on all social media platforms at P.A.S. Report.